Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We are here for disciplined innovation from concept to market in medical technology. We are Chrysalis, and joining with me here on my left, Ben Tram. Ben, thank you, Ben. Ben is a patent attorney and co-founder here at Chrysalis. Ben was formerly with Medtronic. He's an electrical engineer. He chairs the practice at Merchant Gould for their technology practice, which Ben can share more about. Yep. But he has patented hundreds of medical devices. My name is Mark Gardner. I think many of you know me. I founded Gardner Law, practice regulatory law, expert in FDA and other matters. We will talk a little bit about CMS as well today. And joined to me to my right is Dr. Darryl Barnes. He is a Mayo-trained physician and founder of the MedTech company, co-founder of MedTech company Sonex. And he could share more about that today and some different stories. And we have Brendon Pittman here, last but not least, MBA extraordinaire, former Medtronic, former Boston Scientific, and has great depth in product marketing around medical devices. So I will hand it over to Brendon. He's going to be our MC for the day and be pitching questions and walking us through a few slides. We invite your questions. If you want to post those online, please go ahead and do that, and we will keep an eye on the chat. We're also going to try and keep Brendon from getting blinded today because we are in a...
I just have to move like 2 inches, and I've got the sun.
Yeah, so come on over this way.
This is a new spot for us in the sun, this webcast.
Yeah, so Stillwater, Minnesota. This is
I'm good.
An old power plant that wasn't designed with the sun in mind. People weren't supposed to be working in an office setting in here. They're supposed to be producing electricity. So Brendon, without further ado, please take it away.
Yeah, and we have an hour because your whole team is going to be coming back after lunch. So we gotta stop at 1. So anyway, I'm just gonna back to the slide on objectives. So just in case make sure you're on the right webcast. This is Chrysalis Incubator, and we are basically outlining the steps that you can bring your concept to market. And it's using our Chrysalis process, but it also the way we're going to talk today with our dialogue is really bringing a lot of the real world experience that we've already learned, not just from our careers, but also the first several clients we had since we started this venture about a year ago. So, and Mark did the introduction. And so the key takeaways are clients often begin projects without a structured method. And you know, this is something we noticed when we were dealing with our clients is that people come in at different spots. People just don't start and say, well, we got a design on a napkin and go from there. We did have a client that had a design on a napkin. We've had clients that have had the provisional patents. We've had provisional patents that went expired. We've had some do prototypes and some even going further. So point here is that, you know, you have to have a process so when you enter, you can start engaging and know what you've missed and where you're going to go next. Next one is really the lack of comprehensive knowledge and viewpoints. You know, everybody we work with is probably a physician or has a PhD or is a CEO so far. So they have great domain experience. Often what they lack is they have no idea what the IP process is or the regulatory process or how you look at technical or clinical, information regarding the product or a market background. So that's been something we've learned and will kind of seed into our discussion today. And then finally, clients frequently lack the time and concentration to focus. You know, not one person we've met in this, our clients, didn't have a day job, right? Everybody is working, you know, they're 60, 70 hours a week. This is kind of like a weekend project. And so that's where we come in. We can really provide that horsepower to you to really continue this project, your dream moving forward while you're focused on your own thing. So those are 3 of the takeaways that we've learned over the last several months. We're going to see that into this presentation. So first of all, what is a Chrysalis process, especially with the phase 0? We have this disciplined approach. I'm going to turn to Darryl since he's the founder of this disciplined approach. Would you like to talk about what does this mean and how have you seen it play out for us?
Sure. So at Chrysalis, we have a disciplined, stage-gated approach that transforms concepts into investable and scalable companies. And that's in contrast to the build it and they will come type of mindset that often ends in doom for startups. We have a multidisciplinary team. We draw our expertise from medicine, from engineering, IP law, regulatory law, sales and marketing, and we use that to systematically de-risk each step from concept ideation to commercialization. And we have a total of 4 phases, as you can see on the screen. So phase 0, which we'll spend most of our time talking about, which is setting up for success or laying the foundation. Phase 1 is structuring for success. Phase 2, the business blueprint, and phase 3, securing and launching the funding and launching the company. So, we think about, well, why is phase 0 important, or why does it matter? It matters because 90% of MedTechs fail because of just a few things. One, they just don't have, they didn't validate the need, or they run into issues with IP, or they run into issues with regulatory, or they run into issues with reimbursement that they didn't anticipate, and really get stymied in that. So we don't see it as an option to do phase 0. We see it as really an advantage for our clients.
That sounds great. Thank you. Mark, what is there something in your head that we've come across where you could really tell somebody did not have that well-defined, that process, and
Yes.
and what difference did that make to you?
Absolutely. And I think we could all sit up here and tell war stories about the issues we've seen and how great ideas have just never gotten off the ground. And that's really the impetus of Chrysalis. We really want to be alongside the inventors, whether that's a physician and an engineer or a layperson. We want to help them get this idea that they have, just like Darryl and his co-founder had an idea long ago about Sonex. How do you take that idea and get it into the hands of your peers if you're a physician, for example? I mean, it's an incredibly complex industry. We still see tons of people coming into it year after year. So I think the appetite is insatiable for people wanting to help other people. So, some of the stories, I won't get into specifics. We don't have a lot of time for that. I'm sure we'll have a lot of war stories today. But, I've seen companies that start off and they think that they are a 510K cleared pathway type of medical device, for example. And it turns out they're a PMA device, and they spend years and millions of dollars fighting the FDA, for example, to try and be a PMA device. And things have gotten better with the de novo process, where a lot of companies are able to take advantage of that early on, but I've literally seen companies go bankrupt because they just are on the wrong regulatory path and not willing to face that music. And oftentimes the reason for that is because they decided when they set out on their journey that they were on the 510K path. They never went through, presumably, a very rigid or rigorous phase 0 process to actually determine what their regulatory classification indeed is. Same with CMS. You can do the wrong research study. You can try and be something like another device that's our technology that's already on the market. It turns out yours is different, and it doesn't have coding and coverage and payment that are adequate and will not be paid for. You could have the treatment for every ailment known to man. If CMS and insurers are not going to pay for it, you probably aren't going to get it off the ground. So yeah, getting set out on the right path is just mission critical. I sometimes I was talking with these guys rehearsing for this, talking about, think of it as you're leaving a port and you're an explorer and you're going to lands unknown. You should have some inclination, obviously, of where you're heading. If you don't, any path will lead you there, and you need to make sure your ship is provisioned properly to get you to your destination. So making sure you have your bearings before you set off is step one, and that's really what phase 0 is all about.
And I certainly see this in my practice as well. As an intellectual property law attorney, we often have people come to us and request our services, but it's clear that they don't have an overarching plan. A great example of that is maybe someone that comes to us looking for a trademark. They've come up with this great name for their product, right? And so they want to get a trademark. Well, that's great. Trademarks are important. But that's not the first thing that you think about when you're developing a med tech business. When you're creating a device, the name is many steps down before you're going to be worrying about that. Similarly on patents, everyone knows patents are really important. And so they'll come to us. First thing they want to do is get a patent. And like many times that's a great idea. That is a good first step in many cases, but you really have to have a plan of how are you going to fund that and what steps are you going to take? What steps are you going to take in the development of this medical device? Are there going to be variations in what that looks like? And we're going to talk about that more in a little bit. And so, just jumping right into the patent might not be the appropriate first step, or at least if it is the good first step, you want to have a plan of what else are you going to do with your business to make sure that this product actually can be successful.
I was going to add one comment to that. We know that if you're out there and you're an inventor and you're watching this and you hear me saying you need to know where you're going, I certainly appreciate that you might not know. You're like, I don't understand FDA. I don't understand the Patent and Trademark Office. I'm not a medical doctor. I haven't worked at the world's largest med tech companies where I was launching game-changing products. So we know that, and we are here to help. And if it's not us, you got to find someone else to be your guide through these processes because they are so incredibly complex. If you make a misstep in the beginning, you're going to be like off in the wrong trajectory and you're going to waste a lot of time and money. So that's ultimately our, if you take away nothing else from this presentation, it's we're going to talk a lot about the different disciplines that you really need to be solid off in front of investors, for example, and these are critical for your development of your technology and ultimately getting into the hands of providers.
Excellent, man. Sounds good. Let's move on to the next slide. This is really kind of the first thing you really got to tackle, and that's the unmet need, unmet clinical need. Darryl, from your experience, how do you figure that out? What's the technique that you do to kind of make sure you got the right thing there?
Yeah, you really have to dive into it because the problems are abundant. There's no doubt about that, but they can be elusive. So in my 20 years experience as a physician, we're really getting into these things become very personal. You're dealing with patients and their problems, but you have to ask yourself, why is this a problem and whose problem is this? Why isn't there a better solution? So you really kind of dig into that and understand, who has the need. And in order to understand that need, you have to understand who is it affecting? So who are the stakeholders? For sure, you think about payers being a stakeholder. You think about providers, physicians being a stakeholder, family members being, but certainly the patient being a stakeholder is important because that allows you to articulate what that problem is from a diverse group of perspectives, and that's how you really validate what a need is, and then think about the solution after that.
Yeah, I agree. I really like to understand the patient pathway. Yeah. To know where the patient we think is going to.
Yeah, come on.
Oh, first of all, I got to scrunch in, but also I need an umbrella. I got the sun.
Yeah, the sun in your
Anyway, sorry. Patient pathway. You'd like to know where that patient does enter the healthcare system. Are they going to a PCP or are they going to a specialist? If they go to the PCP, are they getting referred to the specialist? I think it's really important to know that because as you start to understand the unmet clinical need and who's going to be the decision maker in that process, it's going to inform you a lot about reimbursement, regulatory path, all that stuff. So,
Right.
So I love that. Great. And we'll move real quickly just to kind of the next thing that part of that is the market. So, we have some fancy terms there on TAMs, SAMs, and SUMs, but for that, when you're starting to look at market opportunity, Darryl.
With the sun.
Yeah, appreciate it. That is a little better, son. When you look at market opportunity, when you especially in the context of your own company, Sonex, what were you looking at, and how did you start to put those numbers together to know that you actually had an opportunity there for this unmet need?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So we were looking at the problem of carpal tunnel syndrome and how that was affecting our patients and where were the patients going for their solutions. And in fact, were they taking us up on the solution we were offering? And so just a little bit of background. So carpal tunnel syndrome is essentially a pinched nerve in the wrist, which causes hand pain, numbness, and tingling in about 13 million Americans. And we knew that 2.7 million were indicated for surgery, but we're only doing 600,000 surgeries a year. So that just begged the question of what's happening, or why are 2.1 million patients sitting on the sideline? And so you have to dig into that and to understand that. But as we dug into that and did our own surveys and research, we found that a lot of people, maybe I think it was over a third of the people were intimidated just by surgery itself. And the other third were intimidated by the recovery that it would take if they had the surgery. And then the other third or so had some other economic issues. And that's why they weren't getting the surgery. So that really informed what the solution needed to be for us. We knew that if they were intimidated by the surgery, we needed to be less intimidating. What did that mean? If they couldn't afford the surgery, what does that mean? How do we solve that problem? And then, recovery was a big thing. So we knew we needed to be smaller because we wanted a faster recovery. But we really dug into what is the unmet need, who's that affecting, who are the stakeholders that are involved in that, and what is it going to take to get from this idea that we had into patients and treating over 50,000 patients, which we've done so far.
Yeah, that's great. Mark, you've been pitched a lot, right? And when you're hearing somebody pitch you, like, what does the market opportunity mean to you? Like, do you look at these terms like total market to all the way down to the the serviceable obtainable market? How does that inform your decision as an investor?
Absolutely. I think, and I do some MedTech investing, angel investing, and so I do see quite a bit of deal flow. And yeah, it's you aside from this, also it's just some of the critical questions which we'll get into later that I want to make sure that I see that from investors. So that's something that we'll talk about later this morning. Excuse me, not from investors, from inventors. We want to make sure they're checking certain boxes. But yeah, I think the age-old thing that you see is someone will say this is a multi-mega billion-dollar market, and ultimately that's kind of that's interesting. But so what? What percentage of those patients can you actually help? And that's really where you want to zero in.
Yeah, I think you're right on. Like, how often do you see somebody go, oh, there's 1 billion patients
you're
worldwide
right.
out there that can be, who need this technology. But once you start digging into the barrier analysis, and you start looking at, well, how many are actually in the United States? How many is this Medicare, Medicaid type of solution? Are they reimbursed? It starts to narrow that pie down. And then you go, oh, how about competition? Are you going to be competing? And it gets smaller and smaller. So, but then you really know kind of what your opportunity is, and you can run the numbers, which is great. And whether it's
absolutely critical that do you have a hobby or a business? Is your product going to cost $5,000 to bring to market per unit, and the reimbursement is $500? Those are the economics of that goes along with this market assessment that needs to be covered very early on so that you can make decisions. We talk about failing fast. If we're working with, again, very busy people, as Brendon pointed out earlier, some are CEOs, some are laypersons, engineers, doctors. They don't have time to waste. And so we're encouraging them to look at these questions really early so you can fail fast and move on to something else, something maybe more fun and less, won't torture you as much as some of the experiences we've had in this space. We certainly wouldn't discourage anyone from pursuing their dreams to be a MedTech innovator, but it is, as I mentioned, a long and tortuous path, and with a huge potential for rewards, not only to help people, but there are obviously remunerative rewards for bringing a life-sustaining or life-enhancing medical device to market.
And you kind of keep going with that, because I've switched to the next slide on the right solution. So I mean, you get the unmet need, clinical need done, and then you really start to work on the solution. What is that going to look like? And from your perspective, what does that solution what's the implication if you don't have it right? Like, what are the risks that go for you, from a regulatory perspective or reimbursement if you don't get it right and you have to come back and change it?
Well, I think you've probably spent millions of dollars potentially if you might have gone to all your friends and family and raised money, and it turns out you're on the regulatory path that's inappropriate for your product. You may be starting over. Same with CMS. If you have a PMA device, I can't imagine a scenario where there would already be adequate coding and coverage and payment for it, because the world's never seen what you have. So making sure you have a effective strategy with reimbursement right off the bat is going to be really critical for you, and knowing which path you're on. The kind of going to your question, like things that you need to know about, Brendon, when you're staking out, how much money are you going to need to raise? If you have a 510K cleared device, if you're on that path to be 510K clearance, that is, hopefully you can get your product to market in the millions of dollars. If you're a PMA device and timing, hopefully you can do that in maybe a year or two, depending on the sophistication in terms of your quality management system, your design controls and whatnot. But if you are just starting off anew, give yourself a year or two to get that product to market. If it's a PMA device, it's 5 years and $100 million. And if it's de novo, it's going to be somewhere in the middle there. So just making sure that you are thinking about these things, and ultimately, what is your solution? Are you going to be going for some indication that is the world's never seen, so your PMA, or are you going to be going for more of a I'm like something that's already on the market? That's going to be a much easier hurdle to get over than PMA. I mean, it's simply put, you're looking at totally different equations and order of magnitude or more for those two different pathways.
And you got to make sure you have the right predicate.
You got to have the right predicate.
I mean, otherwise it could get down the line and submit to FDA and find out that your product doesn't fit what the FDA is looking for.
They might not even accept your application. They may refuse to accept it if it's not compiled properly. Once they start to review it, if you have the wrong predicate because your intended use doesn't match up with what's already on the market, you will receive an NSE, non-substantial equivalent. So yeah, these are absolutely critical questions that you have to get right from the offset. I mean, of course, there's room for flexibility, but and I just want to say to the audience again, I know we have a lot of laypersons on. Darryl started off on this path with his partner, and they have a really successful company today, wildly successful. So it's not, these are not issues that you can't overcome. And I know that Darryl is very sophisticated now when it comes to the FDA, and he knows all these words I'm throwing out there and on how important it is to get these things right at the beginning.
It's important. It's it's your chance to get a good picture, a snapshot of what the future could be, and that's why phase 0 is so important, because you're going to look at all of these things ahead of time. You don't want to run into these things down the road. You don't want to say, gosh, here we've spent millions of dollars on this device, and here we are ready for design freeze, and someone says, well, you've got this issue with reimbursement, or you have a regulatory issue on this part of what you're trying to claim. This is your chance now to really look at what is the unmet need. So we talked about that, defining that, but then you have to make sure your solution, and we're talking about solutions now, your solution meets that unmet need. You may come in with some device, oh, this is the latest, greatest thing, and I'm going to now find something to solve. That's not typically the way to go about it. So it's really to understand your unmet need, design that solution to meet the unmet need, and then take your step back and say, what is it going to take for me to get this idea into patients? And that's going to be looking at IP. That's going to be looking at regulatory ahead of time. It's going to be looking at what is it going to take to be sales and marketing or reimbursement. What clinical data am I going to need? What clinical data am I going to need for IP? What clinical data for regulatory, for reimbursement? So there's a lot of things you can look at without spending a fortune, and you really don't want to burn everything up front. until you've really answered these questions. And I know, as an investor, you're not going to give anyone any money to burn without answering these questions. So that's why phase zero, I think, is important. The other phases are important as well, but phase zero
right.
and what we do are.
Yeah, it'll have consequences all the way down the line, and
They
we've
come
seen that a
back- they
million
come-
times.
they come back
That's-
and
That's
bite
why
you.
we're doing this, right? Is
They will bite
because
you.
We've been
Yeah.
in that position
that
where we
position.
saw it get
Yeah.
all the way down the line and
Absolutely.
then be like the wrong solution.
Yeah.
So Ben, because IP, intellectual property, is probably one of the more complex issues. Obviously, you got an engineering degree and a law degree, and that's and so actually has got a PhD in astrophysics, something like that. No, when you obviously, when you get going, there's certain steps you need to do, like we say a provisional patent or whatever, but ultimately, like what are you looking for? What the concerns have you seen even in our last year of working with clients
Yeah.
about the patent situation?
Yeah, I mean, I really, as a being trained as an engineer, working as an engineer a couple of years, I always thought I would be an engineer. I wanted to develop products like this. And so I find these early phases to be really the most fun part of the product development cycle, where the sky is the limit, right? There's no end of options and opportunities for how you could take this product. And so we see this as clients come to us, both in my patent practice and here with Chrysalis, where people come in with a lot of ideas, and they usually have a target. There's a problem, an unmet need that they've identified. But how you solve that problem, there's a lot of options for how to do that, right? And so we've got one client, for example, that has a hardware and a software component to it. And we've had a lot of discussions amongst ourselves of, well, what really is the best solution that the market needs here? Is it the hardware, or are there existing hardware components that might meet this need, so we don't have to provide a hardware component? Similarly, with the software, there's maybe a set of functionality that could be selected from, and do you really need to go all out with the most complicated functionality, or is it really sufficient to just have a really simple set of functions? This happens the same with medical processes, where let's say you're trying to blow up something. Maybe you could use a balloon, maybe you could use a mechanical structure like a stent or something to expand it. So there's a lot of options at this point. And so that's both the exciting part, but also the challenge of what we have to face is we need to be ready to protect all those various options. And not only, what is it that we're going to go forward with, or our clients is going to go forward with, but what is the competition going to go forward with? And we need to have that in mind as well, so that we're protecting all of these, various opportunities.
So you're starting to kind of move into then the strategic side of it. And so can you talk a little bit more about what that looks like? How do you develop an effective IP strategy?
Yeah. So one of the things that I thought would be interesting to talk about today is timing of patent protection. So of course, intellectual property has lots of topics. We'll cover a few of those basics here in a few minutes. But usually at this stage of the product development cycle, you're really focused on patents, and utility patents is the key thing we're thinking about. And what I wanted to emphasize is that there's important considerations in the timing of when you file that patent application. And some of them people don't think about. I think everyone that knows about patents knows that it's important to get a patent filed early in the process. That's pretty universally known. But did you know that there's actually reasons not to file the patent early, that there are risks and dangers that come with doing it too early? And one is the obvious one we've just been talking about, which is the variations in the product. If you go and you file a patent application, you're going to have drawings and description, really detailed technical description of what this invention is. It is possible to cover variations in that, but the reality is, really early on, you may not even have thought of all the options, right? And in fact, there might be a better solution that's completely different than anything you have in mind right now. And so waiting to file your patent application until you've sorted out some of these can be a good approach to make sure that you're investing in something that's actually going to be covering the product that you or the competitors are likely to make. Does that make sense? Another interesting thing that I've been thinking about is that the patent system, I think a lot of people don't realize this, that the patent system is actually designed to get you to do a full, thorough disclosure of this secret idea that you've got. And with the goal of the patent system is to get you to dedicate that to the public. I mean, that's the last thing we want at this stage, right? That to take this confidential idea and then just tell the world about it and relinquish all rights. Just say everyone in the world can make this. You're free and clear. But that is actually the goal of the patent system. Now, in exchange for this disclosure, the patent system gives you a limited term. That's the exchange that they make here is the government will give you up to 20 years, maybe 21 years, maybe there's a little wiggle room around that, but a period of time where you can stop other people from using this idea. So that's the exchange. But the key part here is that once you kick off this patent process, there's a very strict timeline going out 20 years of fees and steps that have to take place at very specific points along that timeline. And they all take money, right? And they all take action, and they require you to know what your goals are in obtaining the patent rights. And so filing too early, and I see this with clients where they will file too early, they don't have a business plan, they haven't figured out how are they going to fund all of these steps coming up in the future. And now they get to a point where a critical decision is required, an absolute deadline defined by the patent process. They have to invest this money or they forever lose the right to do that. And so if you don't have the money, you don't have the resources, or you don't have the knowledge of where this is going to go, you can't take that step when it's required by the patent process. So, and maybe another point that I've got here on the slide that's important to emphasize is that by default, your disclosure that you give in the patent application is going to be published to the world in 18 months. And so you've really got only this 18-month period to get on the market and be the first to market if that's important for your business. If you want to surprise the competition, you've only got 18 months to do that. And then secondly, this is creating what's known in our world as prior art. This is creating a full published disclosure of your idea, which is going to prevent anybody else from getting a patent on this idea in the future. And the practical reality of this then, and this is the point that people don't realize, is that if you can't execute on this plan, you take your brilliant idea, you submit it to the patent office, it publishes, and now you decide, well, I don't have the resources to go forward with this, I'm going to stop. I'm just not going to spend any more money on that. Do you know what? You can never come back and try that again. You literally have lost your right to this brilliant idea. And like I said at the beginning, it has dedicated it to the public now so that anybody can go off and do it without having to give you any money, without having to ask you for permission or anything like that. So.
And we had a client who
Yeah,
filed and when we talked to him, it expired.
Yeah,
and I don't think he realized that, the ramifications of not having your stuff together.
Yeah, and of course there are exceptions to all this stuff. That's why you got to have someone that knows how this process works to guide you through this. If you did a provisional application, well, maybe that didn't publish after 18 months. And so maybe you're still okay. There's situations where maybe it, might be all right to do a redo, but you've got to know if that option is available or not. And the point is, don't just jump into it and go and hire your patent attorney and file without having a plan. Because all the patent does is it's just a tool to support the development of your business. It's not a tool that in and of itself is going to create success. I've never in all of my years had somebody just get a patent and someone comes up with $1 million check and says, here's $1 million, right? It doesn't work that way. You got to have a business in order to make money off of this.
And I was thinking too, you have that specific period of time. So, not only having the game plan, like a business plan ready to go, but this is your opportunity to really prototype, right? This is kind of where you really want to explore because you got this freeze where you can really just start to work with that product concept and see exactly all the things you want to tweak it to get it as ready to go for market as possible before going into a product development process, right, and locking and loading. And so, if you get to file a patent and you wait 12 months and go, oh, if I'm not going to start, really limits your time to what you can do in that prototyping period.
Back to choosing the right solution. And so the point here is make sure that your your IP protection strategy is proceeding at the correct timeline along with choosing the right solution so that you have your options available to you. So for example, there is this option called a provisional patent application, and that's a 1-year temporary application. What's kind of nice about this option is that there are ways to update it. Technically, you just file a new application, but you can think of it like submitting your first idea, and then as you learn more about it, you can file additional provisionals during that 1-year period. And then at the end, this can all form one patent application that goes forward. And so this is a nice way to cover some of the things that you haven't thought of, but you only get a 1-year period to do it. If you don't get it in within that 1 year, now you're off on another path of a completely new patent application. And now you've just, potentially multiplied your costs by double all the costs that you're going to have for all your international filings and everything. I didn't talk at all, and the purpose of this is not to do an IP tutorial, but I talked about these timelines and processes, and I should just mention it just so you have an idea what I'm talking about. We just talked about the provisional application. That's a 1-year process where you have a temporary application, and then absolutely by the end of that year, you need to file what's called a non-provisional application. This is also the point that you have to think about international patent protection. And there's another tool we have called a PCT, or an international patent application. It has to be filed at that point. Then from the first date of your provisional, 30 months out is another key point where you have to now take that international application and file it in specific countries around the world, wherever you want. And this is a big cost if you want to get a lot of protection in a lot of countries. So only 30 months from that first filing. And if you filed a year earlier than you could have extended that cost out another year, right? So it's just the business plan has to take into account these big costs. And I mean, I'm not even talking about the entire 20-year process. There's costs all along the way. And so your business plan has to account for those and be ready so you've got the funding or the revenue or whatever it is to cover those costs.
Excellent points. Anybody want to add?
No, I think it's important. I think that the big take home is understanding these things ahead of time before you go out and even get seed funding. I think it's important not to spend your money wisely, right? So you want to set yourself up for success. I think one of the big things that people don't realize is that you out patent yourself, right? So you've filed your patent and then it expired or it's published, and then you say, well, gosh, now I have this new idea that's similar, but I want to use that now. You can't, or someone else takes it, right? It's published.
Yeah, let's say that you changed it a little bit, and so you did another patent application later on, and you decide, well, the first one isn't as relevant anymore, so we're going to let that one go. Well, the patent examiner might say, well, wait a minute, these are really similar. All you've done is you've just changed this, this piece to this, and the examiner might not think that's a patentable change. And this, even though you are the one that disclosed the first idea, that is still considered part of the public prior art. And so that can be used against you, where the examiner can say, your change is just that one little thing, and that, anyone skilled in the art would have known you could do that. That's not patentable. So that's where clients do get into this
Oh my gosh.
tricky situation.
Thanks, Ben. That was great. Good riff there on IP, right? And so going another riff here on with Mark a little bit on FDA and one of the first things people like to do, clients we've talked to, they want to just get the market fast, which I agree with. I think any way you can get to market fast, get selling the product, and especially in this day and age that we're in, and making money is good. Mark, what are some of the things that strategically or examples that you've figured out how to help our clients get to market fast?
Sure. Yeah, and I think we need to move the slides up to the FDA one there.
I will do that. Yep, I thought I had hit it. Okay, there we go.
So, things you should be thinking about, we'll talk about fast in a moment, but ultimately, how will the FDA regulate your product? Again, we talked a little bit earlier about that. Is it based on what it's intended to do? We call that intended use. That's a fundamental term of art in Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. That's how your product's going to be regulated. So if it's intended to treat, cure, prevent, mitigate, diagnose disease, or affect the structure or function of the human body, it's going to be regulated as a medical product. And Chrysalis, we're focused on MedTech here, just to be clear. And maybe there could be a scenario where we're working with, trying to think if we have any right now, a combination product that's really, a MedTech product with a drug element involved. So that'd be called a combination product. But the intended use of the product is going to drive its regulatory classification. So the big difference between a drug and device, the definition I stated earlier still applies, but the drug achieves its primary intended purpose through chemical action, and a device achieves it through mechanical action. And so first step, before we're looking at what's the most efficient pathway, we first want to dial in on what is this thing? Is it a medical device? Is it something else? Is it a device at all? I have a Whoop on here, and the people that manufacture this will argue that it's not a medical device. And they're in a little hot water with the FDA right now over that, because the FDA is saying, hey, your intended use is like a medical device. This isn't a health and wellness device over which we're going to exercise enforcement discretion. So these questions are really critical right at the beginning. I know we keep repeating ourselves about this phase 0 approach, but it is really critical that you know what you are before you try and start selling your product. I've had plenty of clients that have come and have said, well, we're already selling this. And we're looking at it saying, well, you've got an unapproved medical device that's misbranded and adulterated in interstate commerce, and those are felonies. So you want to be careful with speeding too fast to market. Let's say you are a device. The next question is going to be, is it class 1, 2, or 3? The class 3 is going to be the most risky. So that's your implantable pacemakers, neurostimulation devices, things like that. And class 1 would be like, a tongue depressor or a toothbrush, something that's more basic. And then class 2 is going to be in the middle, like most diagnostics are class 2, not all. And just because you're class 1 doesn't mean you're just going to get on the market easily. You can be class 1 and still need a 510K. And I don't want to make anyone an expert. This isn't a law school class or a regulatory class, but ultimately, to just make it somewhat simple, 510K is going to be applying to class 1 and 2 devices, mostly 2. And there's already a product on the market that your intended use matches. Your indications for use, and that's what the FDA will ultimately clear, can be slightly different than the intended use. Like the patient population may be slightly different, and you may need to convince FDA that there's not that the same questions of safety and effectiveness exist compared to the predicate device and those new indications. But just to summarize, think of it as there's something out there already like your product, and you're going to the FDA and saying, hey, I'm like that one. I'm safe and effective like that product that already is on the market. If you have something brand new that the world's never seen, you're going to be pushed into class 3 automatically. That's reserved for products that weren't on the market in May of 1976. And I won't bore you with all the history around why that date's important. But if you're class 3, you're going to have to prove outright that your product is safe and effective. You may petition FDA and say, through the de novo process, and say, we're actually going to submit a de novo, which means we don't have a predicate, but we're not as risky as most class 3 devices. So we want to be in class 2, but the world's never seen what we have because we have a new intended use. So FDA, won't you agree with us that this device isn't radically unsafe, or it's not dangerous like the class 3 devices? If you're putting an embolism coil in someone's brain made of platinum or whatever, some other material, sounds pretty dangerous, because if it goes wrong, you could kill the patient, they could have a stroke. Class 2 would be more like, I have a new type of diagnostic that is going to go upstream in the disease of, whatever, cardiac health it may be, something like that. But there's not a predicate already out there. So you convince FDA you're going to go class 2. And kind of to go back to Brendon's question, what's the speed like? Like if you're trying to get on the market as fast as possible, you really do want to try and get your device to fit into the 510K process. De novo is going to take a bit longer. PMA is going to be the longest one. FDA has 90, 120, and 180 days to review these applications respectively, but those dates can be much longer, sometimes shorter, but especially for PMA, much longer, because the FDA, every time they have a question, they can stop the review clock, go to you with their questions, and that time doesn't count in their statutory deadline.
And the cost follows that as well, right?
Yes.
510K, de novo, PMA, those, but it's kind of
Absolutely.
exponential.
Yeah, it's almost like, I could argue that it could almost be like an order of magnitude for each step. Like, let's say, I think you could confidently probably get a class 2 device. If you had a team that had hustle and you had an engineer on your team and you could do a lot of the work yourself, I think you get a 510K product on the market for $1 million. For de novo, you're probably adding an order of magnitude to that. It's probably 10 million, say. It could be more, right? Could be less. And I would be confident saying that PMA class 3 type device is going to be more like another order of magnitude, so like 100 million. So the time isn't totally correlating, but probably is. If you would actually reviewed the stop and start time, it's probably not that far off. So Brendon, back to your question. If you're trying to get on the market fast, go for 510K. Even if your device maybe does things that are de novo, maybe hold off on those. This is kind of a practice pointer that I would say there's some benefit, and I don't know if this applies to patents as well. Kind of start with like the lower hurdle and then go for the bigger hurdle later. Get some experience with the FDA, get some comfort and some rapport with your reviewer and your respective review branch. Show them you know what you're doing, gain their confidence with maybe a lesser indication and with a 510K, and then you could unpack what you want to do later and go for the next one. This applies right now to a client of ours, for example, with a diagnostic device that incorporates AI, does some really great things. And some of what we're talking about there is like, let's go for this easier clearance first, then we'll come back to the de novo. But that will get you on the market, earning revenues, and you can start to, maybe you'll need to do some research for that AI function, and that allows you to develop relationships with key customers. Hey, Mayo, we would like to have you be a clinical research site for us on this new use, and it sort of gets the buzz and excitement going around your tech. So I think I covered everything on this slide. We could get into part 820. I'd probably put the audience to sleep, but
That's the next one. Just Mark talking about FDA. So, but I think it's really interesting because you were bringing up one of our clients, and we have a couple great examples, I think. And I always have to ask about, like, when do you approach clinical data, and studies, because I feel like 2 of our current clients wanted to just go right into clinical data right away. And I'd say that's exactly why you got to stop and say, well, hold it. That's expensive. That's expensive, especially if you're going to say, like, go to Mayo and say, hey, let's do a contract, get some data here and stuff like that. So how do you know when you need clinical studies or data in order to go forward? And is it these days, do you think it's better pushing that off until you're on market? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. And I know we have about 10 minutes left. I know Darryl's going to have some thoughts on this as well. But my thoughts, like looking at this as a regulatory attorney who, if my job is to get your product on the market as fast as possible, I'm going to be like, let's not research unless we need to. Like, why would we do that? I guess we could just submit. But if FDA is not demanding it, I wouldn't make it a gating item, because you could continue to go down the path of how do we get this on the market lawfully. And you could do research on the side, but if FDA is not asking for it, and by the way, why would they ask for it? Because you have a new technology that they might have some questions like, how is this going to affect safety and effectiveness of this device if you're a predicate? If the questions are the same, you can stay on the 510K path. If the questions are different because you're adding nickel and there was no nickel before, well, now you might have an obligation to do some data to show the patients are going to tolerate this nickel, whatever it may be. And of course, some patients don't tolerate it at all. They have an allergy. So, from my perspective, it's like, data, I would really only do it like if you have to. I think kind of toss it back to Brendan, you a little bit, Brendan. You might say, well, I want data because it's going to be useful for the brochure at launch. But I guess I'd go back to the client then and say, what are your goals? Is it just to get on the market as fast as you can because you already have a customer lined up? Or is it because you want to make claims in a brochure that are consistent with your clearance, so you wouldn't be making new claims that are outside your intended use, but that would allow you to talk about the data, right? And say like, check it out, this is real world evidence. that we have.
There's something about, and that's why it is really interesting. I mean, as a marketing person, I mean, of course you want to get a product to market fast, but if it's going to go into a competitive type of field where you need to differentiate, you're going to want those claims. Like if you're the first with this brand new idea and all that, you can go in. I mean, you still want claims saying that this is the intended use and safe and effective, but I mean, you really got to think about how fast you need to get to market versus how many claims you need to go ahead and necessarily differentiate yourself. And I know we were going to talk. Since we're on clinical evidence, let's just keep going on that one,
sure.
and love to get your thoughts on this too, Darryl.
Yeah, I think clinical evidence, my answer is yes. So that's why
Okay,
I say, yeah, clinical evidence isn't it? I think it really depends on what your intention is for the clinical data. It's either going to be for adoption, compliance, or coverage, right? Those are the reasons that you're going to want that. So I think early on, I think regulatory wise, Mark, I'd love to hear. I think if maybe you're a class 1, but you think you could be a class 2, and class 2 is going to help you differentiate yourself in the market. What data are you going to need? There's phase 0 again, right? You need to understand what should we be collecting and how can we collect that in the most efficacious way and cost effective way. I think if you have a meaningful solution, you want to be able to state that this is a meaningful solution and it solves a problem. And in order to do that and pass the hurdle for healthcare, I think you need to have evidence that's going to help a clinician with their clinical decision making. And so you're going to need to have some type of study, some feasibility studies, some comparative analysis, retrospective, or whatever. You're going to need to meet that. But then the regulatory wise, right, you're going to say you need these studies in order to meet the mark for this. And then for CPT codes, reimbursement, there's going to be a level of evidence that you'll need. So it's important to look at clinical evidence early. But I can tell you, if you don't have clinical evidence on your idea, you don't have clinical evidence on your idea, and you end up missing all those things, right? You're not going to hit regulatory marks. You're not going to get reimbursed, and no one's going to adopt it. So clinical data, yes.
I think it's critical. I do think I've worked with clients that, and maybe if we go back one, Brendon, I have worked with clients where they're like, hey, I have a pedicle screw and it's the same as any pedicle screw out there. And it's like, okay, well, we'll get you 510K on that. And you're not going to be asked for evidence. But it depends on your strategy, right? Like, and maybe you're like, listen, I'm just a commodity that is, it's just replacing something else that's, we're probably not, you probably don't need an incubator for that. Honestly, you probably just hire a 510K consultant to get that on the product quickly. But I agree with these guys. Clinical evidence it's important because what are your reps going to tell? What story are they going to tell if you don't have any data? And if you have a de novo or PMA, it's not a choice. You're going to need trial data. I'll just hit this and turn it to Ben. I think you have something to say. Maybe do you want to continue on this point?
Well, I mean, one of the interesting things that goes along with my previous points is that the clinical data can also support your patent application. And so if this is the type of an invention that maybe is similar to something someone has done before, but it has a surprising result or something like that, the clinical data can be used to prove to the examiner that you've actually come up with something that's not obvious. They might argue this looks like an obvious variation, but in reality, you could use the clinical data to show that it actually is leaps and bounds beyond what anyone knew would be possible with something like this and can support the patent. And so, similarly, this is challenging in the timeline of things because you have to file your patent so early. So how do you file your patent early and get the clinical data, into it, which might take years to collect, is a challenge that you have to work through and be mindful of as you're developing your strategy.
I mean, there's a risk, right, to publishing. You're disclosing. So what would your advice be to, a young physician out there that's running a study and knows you're going to publish some things? When do you say, gosh, I really need to file a patent around this before I actually put this out in
Yeah.
the public?
Yeah, I think that is it. It's before it goes public, you need to make sure that you've got a plan. And usually that means filing a patent application. Um, but it might be also a strategy where maybe you do multiple applications along the way. So maybe there's one part of it that you could protect with a first patent, and then maybe there's additional parts that are more related to the clinical data that you're going to be collecting and things like that. Maybe you could hold that until you're closer to getting the data, for example. So it's really going to be a situational decision that you have to take all these factors into account and consult with your patent attorney. And I think the key is just having everybody in communication with one another and coordinated is going to be so far superior to if you just come to me as a patent attorney, you don't tell me what's going on, and you don't give me your business plan, then then I'm not going to know that, and I can't craft your patent strategy to make sure to account for that. I've actually got a great example right now where a client has developed a product and they sent me over the CAD model and everything, and they were telling me about the product, but it didn't match the CAD model. And I was like, why you're saying that this is integrated, but I see it's actually external. Why are you saying this? And they were like, well, the CAD model we sent you, we had to do because of our testing. The testing required a certain power source. And of course, our product, like let's say it's implantable or something, isn't going to have an external power source, but during the testing, we had to do that. So, just little things like that you don't think of because you're not connecting the dots between what's going on with the regulatory side of things and the patent side of things. It's really important to make sure that is a unified plan all along the way.
I know I'm gonna cover this quick. I know we're running out of time. We could do a blog every week here. I feel like the four of us, and I just wanted to mention that the word we probably said the most today is plan. And that's really what we're about, helping you plan and strategize for these really critical questions. So here's CMS again. We have to plan. Does adequate coding, coverage, and payment already exist? If you're a PMA device, it doesn't. If you're a 510K, it may, and that requires exploration. So this point, the CMS point in reimbursement, it should not be. We're not going to spend a lot more time on it, but it should not be undervalued, because if you may have a great product. If no one will pay for it, it will not succeed. Period. That is how our healthcare system works here in the United States. It needs to be paid for by payers. So I'm going to flip it back over to Brendon. But yeah, the word of the day is plan. It's like the Cheshire Cat in Alice in Wonderland. If you don't know where you're going, any path will take you there. That's what the cat said to Alice.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way of wrapping up, so why call us? It's like we talked about, you got to have a plan. If you're not sure, we'll help you. And I'd say the same with a business plan. That was brought up a couple of times too. I mean, the statistics are out there. There's so few entrepreneurs that come, especially to an investor with the business plan. Yeah, you got to, right? You're going to put money into something. You need that. We can help you with that. But overall, what we do is we'll set you on the right path. No matter where you're at in the process right now, we're going to help you to get into the process and look back. If you're too far down the line, look back to make sure things are being checked, and then move you forward. The second thing is that multifunctional expertise. We have 4 of us from different areas of our technical expertise, and I find that, like I said earlier, a lot of our clients, they have one, they're physician, very good at this thing, but do they know IP regulatory? That's why you got to call and talk to these guys too. And then finally, empowerment. We are there to really help you get to your goal. That's always the first question we ask is, what do you want to do? You want to, sell this thing? Do you want to run a company? Do you want to license, the technology? We got to figure that out right away so we can start helping you to put that plan, how you get there, how long it's going to take, and how much money. So those are why you would call us. Anything you want to add to that, guys?
I know Well, I know that's great summary. I know we're at our time. I think we maybe could keep going for those that want to stay on longer. I think Charlie, our producer here, maybe there's some questions from the audience. Okay.
Charlie is our
Producer
ABIT
extraordinaire.
extraordinaire. Yeah,
Yeah.
our expert here.
Yeah, we do have a couple questions that came in through the chat. So, all right, there's our timer. So thank you all for joining. Please stick around if you can. All right, for someone just starting out, maybe with nothing more like a sketch, what's the first thing they should do to begin phase 0 correctly?
Go ahead.
Take that. I think, at least you've seen a need, right? And then that's probably why you have a sketch for something, hopefully. But then it's really it's going to go back to the first thing we talked about is really describing the unmet need. And once you do that, once you can state what that is in 1 to 2 sentences and talk to your neighbor about it, and say, here's what I see the need is then now can you match your solution to that need? If you can, then that's the time to go to the next step. If your solution, you had the idea previously, but you go and you really break down the need and you restructure that and you say, okay, this is really it. If your solution may need to change based on that. So it's going to be starting with defining the unmet need always. So that's where you have to start, even if you have a solution on the table. And you can't be afraid to change what that solution is if you've defined your need correctly.
From an IP perspective, the one thing I would just emphasize is to keep it secret, right? It's critical to not potentially lose some of your rights. And this can be tricky because you want to validate the need, right? And you want to get some perspectives from maybe your colleagues in the industry or something to see, is this really a problem that you're seeing out there? You have to be very careful with that because even just talking about the problem might be a disclosure that could be potentially problematic to your ultimate strategy. So just keeping things confidential and consulting with a IP attorney pretty early on is good to make sure that if you're needing to use a non-disclosure agreement or something like that, that you're protecting yourself.
I assume, Ben, also not developing your solution while you're working for your employer using their computer or laboratory or whatever it may be.
Yeah, great point. Yep. IP ownership is a topic that we think a lot about, and this is something in the early stages that definitely comes up where we'll find out that one of our clients is employed by a major medical company and they want to do this on their own, and that's a big red flag right off the bat. So definitely something to keep in mind.
I'll say something quick, just to echo what Darryl said. Having your elevator pitch prepared, and that's a real thing. Like down the road, you may be at a conference or who knows, you're trying to raise money to create your first prototype. You need to explain what your product does in 30 seconds.
Okay, I think that bridges really nicely into this second question. So I'm going to go ahead and ask that. When is the right time to start talking to investors? And what do they need to see from you coming out of this to take you seriously?
You mentioned that already, the business plan. I mean, you got to have the plan. And, like I said, having worked with a number of our clients, I don't think that that's the first thing that they think of. And so helping to kind of put that on paper, work through all these different parts of it so that you come prepared, that you know where you're going to go, what your outcome is, and how you're going to get there is critical to getting money.
Yeah.
I think, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, you gotta have that pitch deck ready, right? Like we're in a new world. If it was 2015, the resources are less attainable. Now, get your pitch deck ready. Go to ChatGPT, go to whatever AI model you're using, and it will help you create your pitch deck. But you have to hit the stuff we talked about today. This presentation could be used as an outline for your pitch deck. Honestly, like where are you? What's the unmet need? What problem are you solving? How are you protecting your idea? What are you going to do at the FDA? How are you getting on the market lawfully? How are you, how's your product getting paid for? How are you going to market and launch it? Brendon could do a semester on launching a product, let alone, 1 hour webinar. So you got to have this stuff prepared, in your market analysis. We talked about that today. Because otherwise the investors won't even have the meeting with you. I've had many investors come to me. I've asked them, how is your product regulated? Oh, it's an NDA, and they have a medical device. I'm like, you don't even know the parlance. How are you going to get it paid for? I don't know. You can't say I don't know to someone. They're not going to write a check if you do.
Well, that's right. I think, what Mark is saying is 100% correct. You have to systematically de-risk what you're talking about. So you have to you have to let the investor know that you understand what the problem is, you've identified it, you can put a number on it, and then that your solution is the best solution that's out there. And then that you can, just as Mark said, you can protect the IP, you have a regulatory path, you're going to get it paid for, how are you going to get it into the market? What kind of clinical evidence do you need? These are all the questions that any investor is going to ask. They want it. It's different. Kind of the VC money would want it de-risk, but this private equity is very different. It's like de-risk everything and then come to us and maybe we'll give you money. So like you said, the environment is different than it was even 10 years ago that I recall.
Prototyping is good, I think. You're going to provide money to someone. It's nice to, if you can, have something that's tangible, maybe not necessarily for pre-seed, but, when you go to a VC and you're looking for big money, you probably need to have that thing pretty fleshed out at that point.
Jump on in front of any audience members asking questions, but I don't know, Darryl, if you want to 30 seconds on your prototype story, because I know I've heard it. You didn't, I'll just let you tell it.
No, a prototype can be just about anything. It just has to convey what it is you're doing. In my mind, your first prototype, it needs to be something you can show your colleagues. So in my case, it was myself and Dr. Smith, who happens to be my neighbor, but was in my practice as well at Mayo. And we had the idea, and we're shooting it back and forth, that we would like to do a carpal tunnel release, which is the problem we talked about, carpal tunnel syndrome, which is cutting a ligament. But we wanted to get into the body in a very minimally invasive way, but then be able to do everything you would do in an open procedure. So we wanted to demonstrate that. So what our first prototype was actually, the handle was a Bic pen. The tip was a air floss device, this tooth device. And then we had a couple Boston Scientific borrowed balloons from someone's lab and a meniscotome blade. But we put that all together and then was able to walk through, here's how it would get in small, here's how we could expand it and make it bigger and protective, here's how we can now deploy a blade and get the blade out of the way, make the transection. But that's what a prototype can be, and then it becomes more sophisticated as you move along. It kind of depends on the spectrum of the device that you're creating.
Probably close to time, I guess, Charlie, here.
Want to wrap it up?
Well, I was going to say, thank you if you stuck into the Q&A here as well. I really appreciate you listening to our webcast. You can tell we're a highly motivated, excited group here who really wants to help you out. So if you want to talk more, give us a call and we'll chat and see if we can help you and help you realize your dream of bringing a new technology to market. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.